of the morning, afternoon, evening, daytime, whatever it is. Two chaps, cultures.
I'm confused what it is because I had a 7 a.m. session with clients this morning and 7 a.m. my time, which it wasn't even daylight out yet. And people were joining me from your hometown of Sydney and from Bahrain and from India and from all over the world. It was super fun to watch how people interact in the same room, even though it's the same daytime outside. It's always fun to do that. Welcome, everybody. Two chaps, many cultures.
What do you? Well, my hometown. That would have been like 11 o'clock at night. It would have well, actually, for you, no, probably 10. Oh, not too bad.
Yeah, it was later in the evening for that gentleman. Yeah. And
yeah.
he was not even an Aussie. He was a Kiwi living in Sydney. There you go.
Wow. That's pretty normal. It's pretty normal. But yeah, and it is winter time, of course, and it would be it would feel like a very late night, even because the sun would have gone down early. So it is the middle of winter. But anyway, that is what we do in this wonderful global world that we do and partake in and teach in. So we should expect that, hey? It's great. And
talking about expectations, because we announced this episode today with, well, sometimes we may go into interactions with a certain expectations of what people's behaviors would be, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think that one of the surprising things for the clients that I work with is to start out any session by establishing what their values are, right? And trying to give them some gateway into being self-aware on what the values they hold, and then look at the values that may exist in a cultural sense of the culture they're going to, and see how their values might inform how they react to the behaviors in the other cultures.
And that is only, I've learned over the years, that is only the first step. And I have to admit that the way I was introduced to the cross-cultural field, a lot of it was based on national comparisons. That's how many of us start the journey. And I have come to accept over the years that national value sets or equating a certain group culture with nationality is a quite flawed concept, because there are so many nuances and variances within one nationality. And as we all know, during our lifetimes, national borders are being redrawn. So what constitutes a nation now may not be the same 15 years from now. So it's a bit of a challenge to when we prepare our clients for the transition, that they don't jump to the conclusion, well, I'm going to country XYZ, hence I better expect these types of values, and ergo as a result of that, these behaviors. Our value systems are not only informed and influenced by the culture in which we grow up, it's also a matter of our personality, right? And personality plays a big part of it. That's why there are many different concepts out there now taking this into account. In my practice, I call it ICE-Q. So the three-letter acronym IQ, CQ, EQ. So intelligence plus, well, the subject matter expertise plus cultural intelligence plus emotional intelligence is together. I call that ICE-Q. You need to have the bouquet of those three flowers in order to make it a bouquet, because if you only look at one, it may not be enough. I know these are somewhat arbitrary or manufactured academic ideas. I think what it boils down to is look at the human being and not only at their passport, because the passport may not always line up with the expectation that you have about that culture from that passport, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We came across this in my days going and doing business in China, and where I had a colleague of mine that was Danish, and he was always he told me that he was always frustrated about for what he perceived was a lack of information that was shared with him by his Chinese counterparts in a culture that he lived in Shanghai, decided to move there. And before he moved there, he was told about how really the Chinese valued honesty and integrity, and and it's all about nyanzi, about face, and he equated that with everybody just giving all the information and being, but it's a high context culture. So the culture itself, doesn't allow for, I guess what we would term in a Western sense, honest and open dialogue between people, especially when he was a senior person, the CEO of the company, and they were just giving him face by agreeing with him, but they didn't really agree with him all the time. And he wanted, he was a great leader. He wanted input, but the input wasn't freely given to him. And he took that as perhaps dishonesty. And so it went against what he perceived was a value of the Chinese, what he really valued in the Chinese. But that behavior kind of went against what he was expecting to see. So when we kind of into it and we watched and we changed the way that he perceived, we changed the way that he invited the people to give him feedback, it fundamentally changed his business. It changed the way he interacted with people, and it was much more productive.
And I think it's worth looking at how we define these terms, because some of us may have different views of that, or have different ideas of what is a value. What does that mean? Is it a value that I brush my teeth every morning and every evening before I go to bed? Is that a value, or is that a behavior? So you could say you value dental hygiene and staying healthy, right? That a value is something that you consider to be the right thing to do. And the behavior is something that you sometimes conform to because your environment expects you to be that way. So not always is our behavior aligned with what we value. And then I'll throw another word into the mix, the word belief, right? So if a value is what we consider to be the right thing to do, it's right. I value this. This is right. And the belief is, I consider this to be true. I am certain that this is true. I truly believe this. So I believe in dental hygiene. It affects my whole bodily well-being. So I value that it's a right thing to take care of my body. Hence, I deduct the behavior of keeping my teeth and my gums and my mouth clean, hence healthy. So that is a behavior that would result from that value and belief. Now, if I live in an environment, for some reason, I'm making this up, I don't know if such an environment exists, where everybody behaves in a way that cleaning your teeth is an afterthought. It doesn't really matter. It's a waste of time and resources, and we don't have the water, and toothpaste is expensive, and why bother at all? So I might feel...
I used to have a member of my family that chewed charcoal to keep his teeth healthy.
Right.
And from his belief, it did a good job. I mean, the guy had great teeth. I just remember, and he was a member of my family, but it was just growing up, it was always kind of commented on. And he used to say, "Oh yes, I chew charcoal." I mean, that's the strangest thing I've ever seen.
And I'm not sure how well that tastes, but maybe they like it. I think the behaviors is what we consider to be quote unquote normal in the environment in which we operate mainly. So that is something that we default to because our environment showcases it to us. How many times do we do things that we wouldn't do based on our values and beliefs, but we do it because other people do it? And sometimes you may not even be consciously aware of it, right? I notice this now in Corona times that I drink less alcohol, even though the narrative is that people are becoming home drinkers because that's the only thing that keeps them sane or whatever. I notice for myself, I drink less because I am not in company with people as much as I used to. And I simply don't enjoy the glass of wine by myself all that much, I noticed. So and then when I'm out with people, just yesterday, I walked the neighborhood, I walked the dog and came across our friends / neighbors front porch, and they said hi at a spatial distance. And sure enough, they poured me a glass of bubbly wine, and I accepted it without even thinking about whether I wanted a glass of wine in that moment. By the way, it was still daylight out. And I got a little tipsy right after that, to be honest. So and it reminded me that behavior is something that is oftentimes influenced by our surroundings. Our values and beliefs don't have to be in line with that, don't have to be influenced. I would say that our values are shaped at a very, very early age in our lives, when we recognize that this is the right thing and this is not the right thing. And I've had many conversations with people, well, my values can change over the years. And I don't know, do you think, Brett, do people change their values?
Oh, they would have to. I mean, I think as you and I have both moved countries, I think my values have changed. I mean, they're reflected in the results of pretty much every cultural assessment or personal assessment I do. Whereas I look back and I think, I'm pretty sure that I would not have held these beliefs or these values if I had have stayed in Australia, surrounded with the culture that I was surrounded with back in Australia. It doesn't make me any more enlightened than any of my friends that stayed that are still successful back home in Australia, but it just sets me differently in my path has informed. Also, the fact that I'm married to somebody from another culture. I think that has informed and changed the way that and it also informs the way we parent. Right, and so if Emily if our daughter was growing up in a homogenous marriage, there was two of us were the same, we probably would be. She would probably turn out a different kid. So it's very. I mean, and there's of course we get into third culture values of third culture kids and things like that, which are really fascinating to me. But I think that I think part of I reflect on my time in Australia. I've done a lot of that, and I think that really it has evolved. Yeah,
but it took a major event, an outside impulse to shift your values to a certain degree. So it was moving abroad, it was getting married, becoming a father. It could be, I think it might be even more pronounced for women when they give birth. I think that could be a very major event in a female's life. It could be death, loss of a close family member. It could be, for me, it was losing. Well, I'm calling it losing a job, but that's not correct. For me, I changed careers, or my dependency on permanent employment changed. So I'm careful how I'm choosing those words, because it's easy to call it I lost my job, but that's not what happened. But that, for me, that was a shift in values. All of a sudden, I took a different look at what it means to generate value and being compensated for it, and being in a matrixed organizational structure with different levels of hierarchy, how important that was to me before and how much it was afterwards. So I think it always takes a major impact or some type of energy bolt from the outside to shuffle our value deck a little bit. I'm not sure if we can do it intrinsically. I'm not sure of that. I'm not a psychologist, but I would suspect that would be a hard thing to do from the inside. We need to have the interaction with the outside to do that. And I mean, what are some of the values people would associate with my culture, right? Germany, a lot of people say, well, the Germans value precision and punctuality, efficiency, maybe. Let's just throw that out there as generalizations that many people have of German culture. When you meet me, you'll recognize I'm everything but punctual, that I really have a hard time showing up on time, which is counterintuitive. The expectation of my behavior is not there, will not be met. If you expect that of me, then you'll be disappointed. I'll be a bad German for you, because my behavior does not reflect that. Does that mean I hold that value of punctuality and efficiency and what was the other thing? Precision? Maybe not, right? Because for me, other values are at the foreground. So does that make me less of a German? I'll let you decide. It makes me 100% me, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really the essence of it. I mean, because we're basically look like the homogenous society that we live in here. We're white, middle-aged guys. Before we open our mouth, we're just basically assumed that we're just part of the group here. But there are more nuances below the surface. Of course, you know, you open your mouth and you've got a bit of an accent. Of course, that's a first indication.
Right.
And then you throw out, then people throw up. I mean, how many times have people say to me, "I love Australians. They seem to be so laid back and happy." Well, you should have been around me last week when, when something was driving me crazy. You probably wouldn't have said that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is something that we can start the conversation. We always say with these assessment tools, with these things that give us insights into the surface of a culture, they're great starting points, fantastic starting points, but do not diminish and do not underestimate the influence of a person's experience and family upbringing, history, heritage that informs how they work today. You know, I think it's always very important. So you're always kind of like you set yourself up, you start with what you think is the right practice, but always be ready to change, always be ready to pivot. Yeah.
And if a behavior does not seem to be right for you at first, I think that is a lesson that I learned living outside my native culture, that initially there were new behaviors introduced to me that were presented to me as normal because my environment and the new culture modeled it for me. To me, it was not a behavior that I felt comfortable with. However, I was gently nudged into that direction because I wanted to conform. I wanted to belong. So I figured maybe I need to behave this way, even though it does not necessarily align with what I believe to be my values. So sometimes we can modify our behaviors. It doesn't, just because you change your behavior a little bit to the left or to the right of your default setting does not mean that you're being untrue to your values. You're just displaying and modeling and exercising behavioral flexibility. It's something that we in NLP, neurolinguistic programming, we always preach from day one, is he or she with the highest levels of flexibility will be successful. Because if you're stuck in your ways, then that's a surefire way to hit a wall, and it will allow you to be successful to a certain degree. However, without the flexibility, or as our friend Andy Molinsky calls it, dexterity. I'm pointing to the cover of his book, right? So without a certain bandwidth or I don't know, flex zone, either you choose the word you want, it'll be hard to achieve your goals and objectives in an international setting.
Well, you did bring up a good point, and it's one thing I always state repeatedly during working with clients. As I say, please understand, we're not asking you to change who you are. There is nothing that will change who you are. You are intrinsically you. You are a fully formed human. You are valued, and you are, you are complete. What we're doing is exactly that. Is we're saying now expand your horizons, and that may be fearful. That's and of course from some people, from certain cultures, that brings in risk, that brings in discomfort, and that is hard. But it is, as somebody who has done a lot of moving outside of their comfort zone, I can tell you on the other side of it, right, there is great knowledge and insight. And I always snap back in. I can snap back into being my regular old Aussie self. Don't worry. Every time I walk on the cricket field on a Saturday here, I guess most people wouldn't recognise who I was. because because I'm around people, that are like me, that play the sport I play, that inherently know that game, not from a rule book standpoint. Right? We're talking about cricketers a lot. We talked about sport the other day, but I use cricket as an analogy where there is a rule book, but much of that rule book only pertains process. Behind that rule book, underneath the surface, when you walk out in the field, as you grow up playing this game, there are things that are just inherently known to you that you must do as a gentleman, even, right? They use that word in that sport. That you should do and reflect that in the way you play the game. So that's the way I snap back into that. It's easy for you to snap back into that format when you're in your home culture, even though you're outside of it. But then I understand that, like you said, there are certain things, whether it's through wanting to conform or whether it's through wanting to respect, the culture and the people you're working with, then the insight for me has been great to say, I can sit in a room with a CEO, or I can sit next to a janitor or something, and I can have the same conversation, but I can manage to do that in 2 different levels and realize those 2 people have values in and of themselves. I'm not changing myself,
And I think it's easy to, in maybe at least in the English language or maybe some other languages, to get the behaviors and the values confused. I noticed this with on a group call this week. There was in a course with multiple sessions. There was this lady. I'm not exactly sure where she was from. I would say from a Western country. Her English sounded very much American. She might have been Canadian. I'm not quite sure. And she lives currently in either Saudi Arabia or another fairly religiously conservative Arabic country. And she made the point that the expectation of the culture that she's in is that she's changing her values. And I challenged that. And I said, what specific values do you feel are being under siege? Well, what are you challenged to change? Well, I cannot dress the way I would like to dress, and that is something that I have to conform to. I said, well, are you sure that's a value? That sounds more like a behavior. You behave in a way, you dress the way you do because that's the normal the society around you expects you to do. So that's behavior. It doesn't change the value that you don't like to dress that way. Your value is, I want to dress liberally the way I'm used to, that what I think is right. And she pushed back a little bit on that, but I noticed that sometimes people think that values and behaviors are the same thing. They're not. Behaviors may be a result of your value, or a behavior that you don't like. Maybe you may not like it because it clashes with your values. So don't get those 2 confused. At least that's how I view it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. We'd like to learn and understand and hear from you as the viewer, and people out there around the globe from your cultural perspective. What do you find is a good value? What certain values do you hold in which you come across behaviors of other people that challenge those values? We'd love to hear that, and include it in the comments if you're watching the replay, and let us know what you think. Always interested in that. You can see our little ticker symbol.
We could even say, place your questions in the comments. We have stuff like this. We can bring up stuff right on screen. Aren't we awesome?
Absolutely. Look,
we play with arrows too. Look at this. Ooh. All right.
I really need to get a life.
Well, playing with arrows is what I did as a little kid when we dressed up like Native Americans and white settlers, and we battled each other in totally culturally inappropriate ways.
Yes, absolutely. It's now we talked a little bit about we touched on a little bit about how our brain works and that kind of thing, and neither of us are psychologists or neuroscientists, if you will, but we do have, I think, in a couple of weeks, we've invited some guests on that actually, because I find this topic fascinating. I'm probably not smart enough to understand it, but I find it fascinating in how it affects us as we cross cultures. So we have 3 guests now that are going to come and join us, and from there, both authors and highly respected people in this field. And I would encourage anybody, and maybe we should suggest this in all our episodes leading up to that, is that if you've got questions about how the brain works, how the thought process, how the mind works when we cross cultures, because that is at the core, speaking about today's topic of values and behaviors, that I think is at the core of how we respond to things. And I'm really looking forward to that week. I'm going to be fascinated. They could turn into long conversations if we're not careful.
We will look like real idiots on those episodes. That's great. We will have finally we'll have some real smart people in the room. Nice.
Finally.
Okay. Finally.
Well, no, actually every time we have a guest, they're a lot smarter than us.
Yeah, that's true too.
That's why we do what we do. We don't. Again, we're just here to bring and enlighten the work of the people that we look up to and learn from. And that's, if nothing else, we'll get something out of it.
Thank you. All right, this was, man, it's Thursday already again. This is going by so fast. Two chaps, many cultures. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you're watching the replay, sorry we didn't address your question live. Type it in there. There's always an afterlife to every episode.
We'll
See you
get back.
tomorrow.
See you guys. Bye.